All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Was going to talk about something completely different tonight, but when the news broke about Nick Saban retiring from the University of Alabama as their old ball coach, simply had to take time to talk about arguably the GOAT when it comes to college football coaching. You're talking about one of the greatest coaching careers in the history of collegiate athletics. This is what we're talking about with Nick Saban, with what he has done in Tuscaloosa since 2007. Basically over that time, it's been Alabama and everyone else. 9 SEC championships, 6 national championships, 8 trips to the college football playoff in the 10-year history of the event, as the tournament really didn't exist without Nick Saban in Alabama. I mean, you figure Saban in Alabama, they just became the gold standard for how a college football program was to be run. A who's who of NFL players that were recruited and coached by Saban in Alabama. And I'm just going to name a few. Okay. This is just a few of the guys that went on to the pros. You got Julio Jones, Dante Hightower, Amari Cooper, CJ Mosley, Marlon Humphrey, Minka Fitzpatrick, Quentin Williams, Tua Tagovailoa, Derrick Henry, Jalen Waddle, Patrick Surtain II, Devonta Smith, and Will Anderson Jr., just some of the names. And with the exception of Henry, all of these guys were taken in round number one. You think about it, not just the players that have gone on to have success, under Saban, the coaches that have gone on to have success under him. And just a few that I'm going to rattle off here. Lane Kiffin, who's currently at Ole Miss, Kirby Smart, who is at Georgia and has won a pair of national championships, Steve Sarkisian, who is at Texas. And of course, Sark, it was one of those things. He started off strong at Washington and USC. And then, after a slip up, he found his way to Tuscaloosa. And of course, the rest is history. But, getting back to Saban and his Alabama program, I know that, CBS just lost the SEC package. And of course, for the last 20 some odd years, it's been that 3:30 slot on CBS for that premier SEC game of the week. And, since Saban got to Alabama, you could have made the case that they could have been the game every single week. That's how popular and that's how dominant that they have been over the conference and in the sport. And just keeping it in the SEC for a moment, how many head coaches around the SEC at the other schools, got fired during Saban's tenure at Alabama? Some places they made multiple head coaching turnarounds or changes rather, due to the fact that their school came up short against Alabama. Just look at Auburn and LSU. Okay, just as an example, as coaches that did solid there, but they were still let go because they couldn't beat that guy in Tuscaloosa, and of course that team. You think about the battles that Saban had with Dabo Sweeney and Clemson in 4 consecutive meetings in the college football playoff, with both sides, splitting it 2-2. The Alabama LSU rivalry. And of course, when Nick Saban left LSU rather in 2004, it was like, okay, you know what? He's going to give this NFL thing a try. The folks in Baton Rouge, they were like, you know what? Thank you for what you've done during your brief stay here, including a national championship. We're good. But little did any of us know that 3 years later, Saban was going to be leaving the Dolphins and could not only coming back to the SEC, coming back to the SEC West and going to Tuscaloosa in Alabama. And of course, that just heightened that rivalry between LSU and Alabama. And of course, how could we forget them meeting in the BCS championship game in the Superdome in New Orleans. And of course, it was Alabama that dominated LSU that night, 21 to nothing. You think about the Alabama Georgia rivalry, and of course, it's basically been one sided. Georgia did win the first meeting with Alabama when Saban got there. That was, a team that still had Matthew Stafford as their starting quarterback. But after that, it became pretty one sided. And it's one of those. Not to say that Georgia didn't have good teams. Georgia had some solid teams under former head coach Mark Richt, and I don't think that, just switching gears real quick, I don't think that Mark Richt never really got the full credit that he deserved at Georgia because he had a solid program. Unfortunately, came up short in big games to Alabama. And then, of course, he was let go. Kirby Smart was brought in, and of course, Kirby has taken this program to new heights. And of course, in doing so, he had to get past Alabama in a national championship game to do so. But nonetheless, the intense rivalry between Alabama and Georgia, and then we saw that once again just last month in the SEC championship game where Alabama upset Georgia as the Bulldogs were going out there looking to make it a three-peat as national champions, excuse me, and it was Alabama and Nick Saban that thwarted those efforts. So, arguably, for Saban, you could clearly say the best big game head coach that college football has ever seen. Nick Saban, you never really could say at Alabama or even at LSU that Nick Saban's team was not prepared to go out there and play. Doesn't mean that just because that you're prepared to play that you're always going to win. Of course not. But nonetheless, his teams were always prepared to play, especially in those big game moments. You think about it, constantly being in the BCS championship game, constantly being in the SEC championship game, constantly being in the college football playoff. This is why those kids were recruited to Alabama. This is the dream that Saban sold them on, as far as, what, you're going to get this opportunity to play this game. You're going to get the opportunity to go out there and make the big play. And more often than not, those players did just that. They executed, especially on the defensive end of the football. You think about it, during Saban's time at Alabama, the Tide only didn't participate in a New Year's Six bowl game or a national championship game, and I'm talking about from the BCS era, three times. That was it. Every other year, Nick Saban's team was in a big time bowl game. With the exception of 2007, Alabama never finished a season ranked lower than 10th. That is phenomenal, especially in this current era of college football. 201 and 29 overall at Alabama, 117 and 18 in the SEC. You're thinking about it, from 2007 to now, Alabama only lost 18 games within the conference. That's just flat out domination. There's no other way to put it. Beating Alabama was an event. And I say this because, sometimes we see teams, or fans rather, students, at a school, storm the field for beating a team. Okay, it's one of those where you save that for, in my opinion, for the creme de la creme. You don't go out, and maybe if it's a rival, I get it. But, beating a team like Alabama, especially with Nick Saban at the controls, that was a big deal. And it always was, because guess what? It didn't happen that often. Only one loss in the SEC championship game for Nick Saban, whether it was LSU or at Alabama. And you got to go back to the 2008 SEC championship game, his first trip there with Alabama, where they lost to Florida. And then, of course, Florida would go on to win the national championship. But then in the rematch in the following year, both of these undefeated teams got to Atlanta once again. This time around, it was Alabama who got the best of Florida. And then, of course, they went on to win their first national championship with Saban at the controls. And let's not forget, because what Saban did at Alabama is flat out phenomenal. There's no other way to say it. But let's not forget what Saban was building at LSU. And basically, LSU could have been what Alabama is now had Saban not have made the move to the Miami Dolphins in the National Football League and what he was building there. He won a pair of SEC championships in 2001 and then in 2003. And I think in 2001, that's when it really got started because you go back to that conference championship weekend. And it was one of those as far as who was going to be the team to face Miami. We had just seen Tennessee beat Florida the week before in Gainesville. They were heavily favored to get to that championship game to take on Miami at the Rose Bowl. And it was LSU and Nick Saban who upset Tennessee. And I really think that kick-started things for him. Came back, won the SEC again in 2003, beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. Of course, went on to win the national championship. And Nick Saban, for the most part at that point, was off to the races. And especially when he came back to the SEC in 2007 with Alabama, the expectations were so high. And it's one of those where expectations being high and being able to live up to those expectations are two different things. And to his credit, he got it turned around so quickly because his first year at Alabama, they were 7-6. Okay. Pardon me, 6-7. But from there on, they were just off to the races. And no, pardon me, I had it right the first time, 7-6. Then because he never had a losing record there. But it's one of those where after that, they were off to the races. He got those recruits in, and I think two of the first two big recruits that he got in, it was Mark Ingram at running back, and then of course Julio Jones at wide receiver. And after that, the rest is history. You start winning Heisman trophies, and it's amazing that a school with such a rich history as Alabama pre-Saban, of course, going back to the days of the great Bear Bryant, they never had a Heisman winner. And under Saban, they got 4. Okay. And then from what he was able to do, not only recruiting wise, especially as he got older, because he wasn't the first head coach that it happened to, and he's not going to be the last. Where older coaches, the other coaches tend to recruit against him, talking about okay, he's not going to be there this longer, he's getting older, you name it. But even through all of that, he was still able to sift through and get those talented kids. Why? Because they wanted the opportunity to play for him. Why? Because they knew that he was going to give them a tremendous opportunity to play at the next level in the National Football League. And the thing with Saban, he was always real with these kids. There was no gimmicks. But for me, the biggest thing is in this era of college football where it's all about the gimmicks, it's all about the gimmicky uniforms, this, that, and the third. Alabama's uniform, probably this side of Penn State and Texas, is as bland as it can be. But you never saw these kids talking about, well, I'm worried about what I'm wearing. I'm worried about this, that, and the third. They knew, listen, let's go out there and put that crimson and white uniform on and go out there and play ball. And, for some people, they would say that the uniform is bland. For me, as a purist, a traditionalist of college football, I respect it because it's still distinct. You know, the crimson helmets, everybody's number individually on the side of the helmet. You name it. White on whites on the road, crimson and white at home, and that's it. But nonetheless, Nick Saban went out there and got the kids that wanted to play, and not only that, not only did they want to play big time football for him and the SEC at Alabama, they knew that he had what it took to help them achieve their ultimate goal, which was to get to the National Football League. So you look at Saban, and it's not just for me where he ranks among all-time great college football head coaches because he's up there. And I mean, we've seen some tremendous college football coaches over the years. Bear Bryant, just to name one, Eddie Robinson. I could just keep going on and on and on and on. Nick Saban is in that legacy. And you think about it because of the era that he's done it in. And it's not just doing it, it's basically domination. It's one of those where with Nick Saban in Alabama, it almost felt wrong if there was an SEC championship game without the Crimson Tide making the way to Atlanta. It felt wrong almost to see the Crimson Tide not make the college football playoff. And you look back at it, like I said, 8 out of the 10 years of this tournament, Alabama was there. And in the 2 years that they didn't make it, they went 11-2 in 2019. And then, of course, that was the catalyst. They turned it around the following year and won the national championship. And then, of course, 2022, where they began the year ranked number one, and it was a walk-off touchdown, a walk-off loss rather, to LSU, a walk-off loss to Tennessee. That's all that prevented him from getting to the to the college football playoff last year. And then, to his credit, this was not the most talented team that Saban has had at Alabama this past season. But this team still won the SEC. Only one loss, okay? And that was a non-conference loss to Texas, a Texas team, of course, that is set to join the SEC next season. Then on top of that, beating Georgia in the SEC championship game. And for what it's worth, Alabama gave Michigan a much tougher game than we just saw Washington do in the national championship game. No disrespect to Washington, but you look at it, Alabama had their fair share of opportunities in that contest. Nick Saban had his team ready. They just didn't execute the plays enough, or the key plays rather, to get them over the edge. But nonetheless, that was with not having a really talented team like we've seen in years past from Alabama, because we've seen in certain years when Alabama got to the college football playoff, they just steamrolled everybody, whether it was the semis or the national championship game. That's how talented that this program has been for under Nick Saban. So I'll tell you like this, um, I don't know who is going to replace Nick Saban at Alabama. I don't know who could possibly replace Nick Saban at Alabama. But the one thing I will say is good luck, because it's always difficult to go out there and have to replace a legend. I mean, you think about it, a guy like Didi Gregorius walked into a very tough situation when he had to be the starting shortstop for the New York Yankees following the retirement of Derek Jeter. You think about Aaron Rodgers having to replace Brett Favre, and of course that worked out, but it always doesn't work out like that in sports. And now whoever comes in to be that next head coach at Alabama, this is what they're always going to be looked at. If whoever comes in and replaces Saban, if that guy has a 4-loss season, they're going to look, well, you know what? Nick Saban never, with the exception of a year number one, he never really did that there. Chelsea Grin, what's going on? How's it going? Obviously, this is shocking news. And you're saying that the hiring process is going to go by slow. Um, it could and it couldn't, because honestly, for me, I feel like maybe some of the folks in Tuscaloosa knew this already, and I'm just guessing, okay? But they kept it really tight-lipped as far as what was happening. I will say this, I don't know who is going to be hired to be the next head coach of Alabama, but I will say this, it's going to be a big name, in my opinion. Number 2, a lot of head coaches around the country just got paid, and the reason is their respective schools, their respective employers are going to back up the Brinks trucks to do whatever it takes to keep that guy happy at their respective institution. Why? Because they are fearful of losing that person to Alabama, because Alabama will definitely put on the full court press with all of their boosters and go out there and try to spend as much as possible to lure one of these big name guys away from their respective institutions. Some people are possibly throwing out the name of Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be Kirby Smart at Georgia, just due to the fact that, I mean, Kirby, in my opinion, on the outside looking in, Kirby Smart looks to be pretty happy at his alma mater. But could you just imagine, just for the sake of argument, if he were to do that, the intensity of that rivalry going to another level between Georgia and Alabama? And I'm just speaking hypothetically because I doubt it could happen. But at the end of the day, it's going to be it's going to be a name. It's not going to be, a no-name coach, if you will, at this state of the game. But you know what? Nick Saban, I don't think anybody when he first took this job over in 2007, I don't think anybody expected him to do what he did. They wanted to have him, of course, bring Alabama back to respectability and back on the national stage. It didn't work out with Mike Shula, didn't work out with Dennis Franchione, and of course, Mike DeBose before that. Now, of course, Alabama did have success with Gene Stallings with his program, and of course, they still are going to talk about it in Tuscaloosa about them beating Miami for the national championship in the Sugar Bowl. But nonetheless, nobody really expected Nick Saban to do what he has done with this program right now, and it is tremendous. And like I said, good luck to whomever goes out there and replaces him. So we have Bryant Denny Stadium that's named after two legends around the Alabama program. I'm sure there's going to be a facility or two at the Tuscaloosa campus that's going to be named after Nick Saban. I'm sure there's going to be a street, a school, you name it, within that town that's going to be named after Nick Saban. I'll tell you like this: Nick Saban will never have to pay for another meal within the Tuscaloosa city limits, nor will his family have to pay for a meal, housing, cars, you name it, because that is how much that man and that family have meant to that community down there in Tuscaloosa. I know that the rivalries on Saturdays in the SEC are pretty intense. I do feel, in my opinion, for the most part, I think the schools around the SEC will definitely take this time to salute Nick Saban for what he's done at Alabama. I'm sure some people are going to breathe a sigh of relief, and for the most part, they should. But let's see who comes in to replace and arguably the goat as far as the coaches, go no, go for what they have done. But at the end of the day, this was a bit of a shocker for me because I did think that Saban was going to hang on to keep Alabama, try to help them transition into this bigger SEC. I was interested to see how Alabama was going to look in the expanded 12-team playoff that's set to begin next college football season. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, Nick Saban took this time that he felt was right for him to step away from this beloved game. This was a big day for sports. It already was a big day for sports, prior to the Nick Saban announcement. And like I said, I was going in a totally different direction with what I was going to discuss tonight until this news broke. Go figure that Nick Saban retired before Bill Belichick did. And, of course, both of them, they're good friends, of course, on the Cleveland Brown staff together, in the early 90s. Tremendous friendship there. Of course, we've seen so many of Saban's players go on to play for Belichick in the NFL with the New England Patriots, coaches shuttling back and forth, you name it, and we can go on and on and on and on and on. But nonetheless, if you're in the Tuscaloosa area, this is clearly a sad day. We all knew that this day had to come eventually. Nothing lasts forever. And the same thing can be said about one of, if not the greatest coaching careers ever in the great history of college football. There will never be another Nick Saban at Alabama. Like I said before, good luck to whomever, you know, is going to be patrolling those sidelines for the Crimson Tide going forward. That is not going to be an easy job. It's always difficult to replace a legend, especially one who has accomplished so much as Nick Saban. But when it's all said and done, somebody's got to go out there and find a way to do it. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line to be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Chelsea Grin, as always, thank you so much for chiming in. I got plenty to talk about over the weekend, especially both National Football League and college football. Even though the college football season is over, still got more to talk about. Definitely on the NFL front. So definitely stay tuned. And once again, I appreciate the support. And as always, folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.